do that, but they'll also pay you to mow your prairie grass down and plant trees. You know, that's the way government works. And government does nothing well, not because they're necessarily inherently stupid, although there may be a problem there too, but because they don't have the profit incentive. What makes the guy who distributes contact lenses is not brilliant either, but he has to compete on a day-to-day basis. That's why contact lenses work, but healthcare doesn't work. There is no price fluctuation in any doctor's fees in the country. Even the private fees are somewhat set because it's all this prepayment thing through insurance. There's no price fluctuation. Contact lenses work, cell phones work, but it's all because you have a profit motive to distribute it. I also tell people, if you like healthcare and you want it to be done by the national government or the federal government, maybe we should have the guy that was in charge of FEMA distributing the water in Katrina. You know, he did such a good job distributing the water at the Superdome. They've had water or ice in warehouses for 5 years, and they finally had to hire another contractor to melt the water because it was outdated and cart off the water. They still have all those trailers in Arkansas. You know the main reason they didn't use the trailers in New Orleans Parish? There's a zoning ordinance that says no trailers. They couldn't figure out how to change a zoning ordinance in the middle of that disaster. No one changed the zoning ordinance to allow trailers.
But they ignored the Constitution regularly.
Yeah. And it's just amazing. But I think you know, where we go, we have to do something. And what we have, and a lot of what we've gotten, really, even from both parties. I mean, I was over in the western part of the state, and the representative from our Republican congressman got up and said one of his biggest achievements was the Medicare prescription drug plan. And that's fine, but then just acknowledge you're not fiscally conservative. You are a big government Republican, and we're a big party. We can have people, but what you have to decide is, who do you want to lead your party? Do you want somebody so-so who's a big government Republican, or do you want someone who truly believes that the system is so rotten that we've got to really shake things up, and we've got to do something really before we topple and implode from our deficit? And I think there is the possibility of worse things than we even have now. Yes, go ahead.
By a very narrow margin of 7 votes, the House just passed a bill that will likely result in a significant increase in energy costs for a lot of Americans that the Senate is going to receive soon. If you were in the Senate now, how would you receive that bill?
I would absolutely vote against cap and trade, the bill. Yeah. I think what we need to do as Republicans is we need to be able to present our message that we are in favor of the environment. Look, we're out on beautiful property land, that we don't want oil to be dumped in the water. We want to maintain our environment. We also need not to be silly and say we're not going to drill for oil in Alaska, in a place where no humans probably ever even stood on some of the soil. But we shouldn't just say Exxon can go do it and let oil go all over the place and kill the caribou. Can you have both? Yeah, I think you can have both. I think you can protect the environment. You can even have offshore drilling. For the most part, offshore drilling is safe. So I'm all in favor of expanding that. I don't think it's the final answer. I think closer to what might be the final or bigger answer is nuclear power. So we need to get obstacles out of the way of nuclear power. I would probably propose, rather than subsidizing insurance for nuclear power, that we pass at the federal level, and states that want nuclear power just pass an exemption to liability for them. And that way you don't have to provide insurance for them, but just pass exemption to liability. And I think that would help, because nuclear power plants, people fear them as like being a nuclear bomb or something, and they have no correlation. But there's an irrational fear out there that keeps nuclear power. France has 80% of their power from nuclear. Windmills and sun and those things are good, but they're not, you know, they might provide the energy for a house here and a house there, but they will not provide the energy for New York City or Los Angeles. A nuclear reactor could provide the energy for New York City and for Los Angeles. And, you know, some of the breeder reactors can actually have the waste product for a year from a breeder reactor is like this big around, about 3 feet tall. And you can bury them safely in salt domes. They bury a lot in New Mexico now. We need to not have irrational fears about things. But from a Republican point of view, we haven't done a good enough enough job in presenting that we like the environment. So, for example, while I'm very pro the coal industry and don't want any regulations to get in the way of coal developing in this country or in Kentucky, I don't think they should dump their sludge in the creek, but I don't think they're proposing that either. But there has to be some in-between on these things to allow things to progress, and a lot of these things can be done locally. I think the local counties where they're doing the coal mining can decide what rules and regulations. They're the ones that have to live with the rivers in their communities, so it's always better to have the regulations, I think, more close local than in Washington. But we have to do something, and I think it's a way of becoming independent as nuclear power is the best chance for it.
Do you think property rights are a good way to take care of environmental concerns locally?
Property rights, definitely. And I think the thing is, and that's another thing we can say as Republicans, is that we don't believe you can pollute. So I don't think they can put a factory over there, and we're not going to give them a permit to pollute. There are certain property rights. If it damages your property here, you should get an immediate injunction. So we can be in favor of the environment and still be Republicans. But we have to figure out how to present that. I don't think it's done through excessive regulation in Washington. I think it's done through property rights and through defense of property rights. And locally. I mean, Georgetown might decide that the Toyota plant puts out 1 part per billion. Is that pollution, or is 5 parts per billion? So a community has local standards. Courts and common law can decide what is acceptable. But there probably is acceptable. I live near all the chemical industry in Texas, and we live with it, and we wouldn't put it out of business. I mean, so there is a trade-off on things, and you define and decide what is pollution and what's too much and what's too little. I have time for one more, and then I've got to run. Acorn. I can't think of anything good to say about them. Yeah. No, I think groups that get federal money shouldn't be involved in the process like that, and any federal money that goes to these groups should stop. I think any group that gets federal money shouldn't be lobbying and working in politics. In fact, I think one thing that we could do, and one idea, we get back to this gentleman asked about new ideas that are different than others, I propose, and this will be a very popular idea, I think, in a general election, that anybody that takes a contract from the federal government of more than $1 million, there should be a clause in the contract that says, I agree during the terms of the contract not to lobby Congress and not to give donations to political action committees and not to contribute to candidates. And that way it's a freedom, it's a voluntary exchange. Right now we have McCain-Feingold, which is an awful trampling of the First Amendment. I have a taxpayer group, and it's illegal for me within 60 days of the election to say anything about a candidate. If your congressman here in town voted for gun control or voted to raise taxes and my group wanted to say something about him, it's illegal for me to put an ad in the newspaper on TV. So McCain-Feingold was a huge mistake, but there's a way of getting to the same result if we kind of do agree that money is corrupting and polluting the system, and that special interests are formulating not only our domestic policy but even our foreign policy sometimes. I mean, if Halliburton gets a $1 billion contract and immediately they turn around and hire a lobbyist for $1 million to lobby for more money, there's a problem if the big, huge international corporations are driving the disbursement of funds. So I think we have to do something about that. But I think we could, through a voluntary contractual way, when you sign up for your federal contract, you have to agree not to lobby Congress. And I think you could get that to work. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.